Right, this video, guys, is only for the Strong of Heart samurai fans. So this is done in association with Samurai Traditions of the Tadagenji. That's the emblem on the left. And Scott from Sengoku Studies. It's going to be on a playlist, so please check the playlist next. This is all about kanji, Japanese kanji, and how it means in the world of the samurai. So I'm going to leave you now with Stephen Nojiri, and who's going to explain about transcriptions in ancient documents. And don't forget to check out the playlist.
Hello, I'm Stephen Nojiri, and Anthony Cummins has asked me to sort of guest speak about a very specific topic, and that topic is variations in transcriptions of the old documents. So, for example, a lot of you viewers may be under the incorrect assumption that a lot of these old documents that we work with, when there's multiple transcriptions, that those transcriptions are exactly the same. They're the exact same copy, they're just newer. But in reality, oftentimes they have differences. And some of those differences are minor differences, sometimes are pretty big differences. So let's talk about that. So the first of these differences can be sort of succinctly discussed, and it's just errors, flat out errors. Somebody clearly wrote the wrong kanji down or clearly messed the grammar of some verb conjugation up. There's usually like one error in the entire document, maybe two. It's obvious that it's an error. And there's not a whole lot more to say about that. You know, you're looking at one copy, you're looking at another copy. There's like one thing that's just wrong. Okay, that's an error. You know, so, but that's not really what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about, and what Anthony has ultimately asked me to talk about, henceforth why this video exists, is when one copy has deliberate differences from a previous copy. Now, we're not going to go into this incredibly deeply because we're trying to keep this video short and succinct, but you, the viewer, needs to know that it is very common for one transcription to be different from another transcription on purpose. And these changes come about literally because the person who's transcribing it has a reason to change it. It could be that they want to update the material. There's been a change in opinion in the lineage, and now they're just changing it. It could be that, the person who's doing the transcription is transcribing someone, like a document that came from group A, but this person is not part of group A, they're part of group B or C or whatever, and they're editing it so that it fits their group. That happens frequently. Now, some of you may say, well, of course that happens. Of course people would do that. And so, okay, yeah, good. Good for you for knowing how human beings think and operate. So therefore, understand that when there's multiple transcriptions or multiple copies of a document, oftentimes you are faced with this issue. You're faced with the issue of, okay, I've got 4 copies of this document, but, there's the oldest one, and then there's a newer one, and then there's 2 newer ones, but they're from 2 different schools of thought, so to speak. So, which one, what do we do? Because, there's the older one that says this, and then the 2 newer ones say something totally different, like sometimes the actual meaning can be changed. Sometimes stuff is just completely edited out or stuff is added in. And before some of you say, you would just use the oldest one, obviously, let me counter that and say that the oldest version is not always the version that corresponds to the tradition that you're representing. Many times, different traditions and schools utilize documents that aren't theirs. They didn't write them, they brought them in. And when they do that, a lot of times they change stuff. So which one do you use? Like if you're trying to, so say you're from tradition X and tradition X uses document Q, okay, well, document Q in tradition X is different than the older version of document Q. So do you go with the original document Q? No, because your tradition X utilizes the new version that they've edited. So in you know what I mean? So it's not as simple as just the oldest document. So what you need to do in this case, you go with the version of the document that is represented by the tradition that you're studying or that you represent, but you also need to know what the original version said. And then you need to learn why the changes took place. What was changed and why was it changed? This is super important. So I'll give you guys a couple of examples just to sort of drive home the point. So in Kusunokiru, there is the what is considered the original kaden. Now, originals sort of used as a placeholder because it's the collection of documents that are called the kaden are almost certainly not the original kaden, but a later version of the kaden, but still, right? Still the kaden, the Kusunoki kaden, right? The Kusunoki family tradition documents. Then, as different Kusunoki-ryu schools appeared, they would take the kaden and then they would add to it. They would add sections, they would take sections out, they would add to diagrams, they would change diagrams around, and they did this. So the different Kusunoki-ryus, because there's multiple Kusunoki-ryus, there's not just a single Kusunoki-ryu. There's the Kusunoki kaden or the Kusunoki family tradition. But when you talk about Kusunoki-ryu, there's multiple Kusunoki-ryus. I've talked about this in videos. It's in my books, etc., etc. Each one of the different Kusunoki-ryus, whether it's Kusunoki-ryu, Tai-Heiki-ryu, Shin Kusunoki-ryu, there's another Kusunoki, it's called Kusunoki-ryu, there's Nanki-ryu, etc., etc., etc. Whichever Kusunoki school, they have the kaden, but then they have the variations of the kaden. So like Yui Shosetsu, Kusunoki Fuden, right? The Nankiru, that has the kaden, but they also have in their Nankiru text, they have edited versions of the kaden, which there's added lines, the diagrams have added features to them, right? So then the question is why did they change? And the answer is very simple. They were in charge of their school and they had learned other stuff and times had changed, so they just edited the document. For you Natoriru guys, Anthony has, as you know, Anthony has all the Natori documents, but I have a couple of Natori documents as well. But mine are a little different. So for example, I think it's Heike Jodan. Anthony has his Heike Jodan copy. My Heike Jodan copy has a different introduction. It has a very Jingunden introduction. It talks about like the military tradition of the sun goddess, etc., etc. It's not the introduction that's in his document. So at some point, somebody had got a hold of a copy of Heike Jodan and added an entirely different introduction. In the Dako Shinobi no Maki, there's multiple copies of it, and they all have a different beginning. Like the beginning in one version is very very it's a specific introduction, and then there's another copy that has no introduction, and then there's a copy that has an introduction that is probably the introduction that the long introduction was based on. So you have no introduction, you have a short introduction, and then you have what appears to be an expounded version of the short introduction. Right? Just because when people were copying it, they were like, I want to add this. And this happens, right? So then the question is, which copy do you use? So let's use an example that's pretty close to my own heart. Let's talk about the Fukushima-ryu Shinobi no Maki. There are 4 known versions of the Fukushima-ryu Shinobi no Maki. There is the copy that I have, which is a scroll from the 1700s. There is the copy in the Tokyo Museum, which is a book form with annotations from 1824. Then at the National Archives, there was a copy of the book form with annotations. And then there is Fujita Seiko's transcription of the copy from the Tokyo Museum. So 4 copies. One of them, it's really 3 copies because one of them is a transcription of the other one. But Fujita Seiko's transcription has some errors in it, which in a weird way makes it its own version, even though it's really just a copy of the Tokyo version with errors. So really, there's 3 versions. There's the scroll, there's the book, the 1824 book, and then there's the National Archives book, which is actually currently missing. So what are these differences? Well, primarily, the book forms with the annotations that are from the 1800s, those copies are arranged differently than the scroll. So the scroll is laid out a little differently. It has additional lines. It also has additional signatures. It has seals and stamps. It has more names in the lineage. The scroll, you can tell that the scroll is actually like a transmission document. Like the scroll has been signed and sealed and stamped. It has extra, some of the diagrams are different. So the purpose of the scroll is more formal transmission. It's a more formal document, whereas the 2 books don't have the seals and the stamps, and they don't have the full lineage tree, and they don't have the additional lines, and the documents and the diagrams are different. So right then and there, just the layout and the function is immediately different. So when you're looking at the books that are in the libraries, the book forms, it feels different than the scroll. The scroll feels like an official document with all kinds of stamps and names and stuff, whereas the books don't have any of that. So it changes the feel for one thing. So substantively, there's some difference there, because so therefore, if you're working on it, then you're like, okay, well, the diagram's different. Which diagram do I use? You know, this one has additional lines. This one does not. You know, so you wouldn't translate from the book and then add the lines from the scroll, because the scroll, the lines aren't in the book. So you know what I mean? So you would have to, like, you have to be strict with, if you're working with this copy, this is the copy you're working with, and you're not going to mix or try to blur the 2 copies, right? Also, not only the additional lines in different documents, but some of the actual explanations are a little different, as well as, for example, the scroll of refining intention in the book copies that are from the museums. They, at the end of the scroll of refining intention, there's a line that says basically, like, there are some times though when you don't have the opportunity to make a plan and you have to just respond. And then there's a section about courage. I'll get to that in a second. There's a section about courage. Then there's a thing about winning 100 victories out of 100 battles by relying on the principle of emptiness. Now, the problem is the line about courage that's in between those 2 sentences is this very weird connecting piece that is very confusing. It's not sure. It's unclear if the part about courage is supposed to go with the first line or if it's supposed to go with the second line. It looks like it's supposed to link the 2 sentences together, but it's kind of an anomaly. Also, it's a bit of an anomaly because it's unclear what type of courage it's talking about. Is it saying that the courage of the way it's written is it the courage of a humble person, or is it the courage of a uncouth person? So is it basically saying like humble courage, or is it saying like no courage, like a lack of courage, like terrible courage, like you're a coward? It's unclear. Now here's the interesting piece. This confusing line that's in the book forms is not in the scroll. The scroll form does not have this line. In the scroll form, the first sentence is very clear and it comes to a definitive end. The next sentence comes through, it's very clear, and this confusing piece is not in the scroll from the 1700s. It's not there. So what that means is somebody added, I mean, it looks like somebody tried to add a line to the copy that ends up in the Densho in the book form. It's not there in the scroll. So so then the question though is, when you're talking about translating the scroll of refining intention, which version do you use? Do you use the one from the scroll or do you do one from the book? And the answer to that boils down to, it depends on which tradition you're trying to represent. Which one are you trying to put forth? Okay, so now I've been rambling on for a while now, so it is about time to bring this to an end. So let's conclude. You, the viewer, need to understand that these documents, when there's multiple copies, that usually means it's multiple versions. You've heard probably me and Anthony talk about, or at least Anthony talk about, multiple versions of a document. But it's not as simple as like, there's like 15 copies and there's like two different versions. Usually it's very, very common for each and every copy to be a slightly different version. And sometimes they can be a significant different version. The difference can be significant. So when you're working with that, you have to decide. You either have to, if you're going to try to amalgamate all the versions into one, you need to let whoever your audience is, you need to be clear with them that you're presenting them an amalgamation of different versions. Or you pick a single version and you just commit to that version. Now, also, this has historical value because the analysis of the differences can provide great insight into the people who are making the differences. When you realize that there are these differences in the text, it almost compels you to have to figure out, to investigate why the differences. Why did so-and-so change this? Why was this restructured? Why is this diagram different? Why does this tool, why is it drawn differently? Why does this one have extra lines? Sometimes the answers are simple and easy. Sometimes they're not. And I personally find it very interesting. I like to figure out why the versions have these differences.